Chair recognizes Senator the Honourable Reuben Rahming.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to give my contribution to this timely land-related matter for our country. I believe many times that, I believe, like Solomon said, it's a time for everything under heaven. And there are some matters that I think should always carry more of a bipartisan tone, especially when they're also very, very critical to our commonwealth. And the spirit of the word commonwealth, nothing reflects more on commonwealth than the ownership of land by its citizenry and action to the land. I believe, as was implied or stated by the Attorney General, though in somewhat of a little unbiased way, that there were, if you can't help it, then we'll speak to it, that there were lapses in this matter, but I don't think it appears, as he tried to put it, but I think it was excessively bipartisan. Nonetheless, I would simply say that I am glad that we are here. And I think through Senator Henfield's contribution, he shed a bit of light on things governmentally. I will do similar, but more so to add gravity to the value and the necessity of this moment in time in light of historically what we have been going through. And it is so, as the Attorney General would have said, that from the 60s there were white papers and attempts, and the necessity for land reform was clearly seen. And then we had the 25-year history of Sir Lyndon, during which time, despite all the other things was done, nothing was done as relate to the reform of land in this particular context. So that word nothing, because I don't like blanket words, is specific and is supported by what was presented by the Attorney General. I think with more so during the time of Prime Minister Ingram and I think a bit under Perry Christie, and also now we see the reforms here. I listened to a statement that was made by the Attorney General that reflected comments made by the former Attorney General, Carl Bethel, and it drew me to some of his public comments on the matter from 2021. And in no ways am I implying plagiarism or anything, copying of anything like that, but if you read what the Attorney General presented and what Carl Bethel had stated then, you would think they almost flowed almost verbatim, probably because the issue remains the same. And they're fighting the same problem. And this is why I thought it reasonable to make it seem like who did not do and who ain't did, when every person saw this and we saw the development of the efforts going towards bringing this to some sort of head. We saw even under the former minister administration in 2021, which is said, as reflected by the Attorney General, that it was the time when the then Attorney General Carl Bethel stated that he was given clear instruction to move ahead with the legal reforms as it relates to land development, and he was urged to do that, and it was triggered by a whole series of things. And we know over the years we saw some of the biggest scandals in land that when we look at the cost of it to the public purse and the cost of hardship to people, it went into the hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of value, fixing problems because of shysters and scam artists and Sir Lyndon Pind on the state. You've heard many times, and I'm grateful for the work that the AG has been doing to continue the program with trying to make people whole in Nassau Village and Pinewood and Sea Breeze because of that land issue. You know, the reference for people to appreciate this, you remember when the church got knocked down? Well, the land related to that issue. The same way with the other issue in Sir Linden Pillen Estates, where we had to actually do a land swap. And government had to do that. Why? Because the people, just as in the instance of Pinewood Gardens, Nassau Village, and Sea Breeze, they weren't at fault. They were duped. And it was to the point now that the persons who actually owned the land wanted to get their value, and who else they're going to get to than to cost the persons who were occupying the land, who in many instances had already paid off their mortgage notes, to have to pay them to get their worth. And the government had to do what it had to have done to make it whole. But this shows a systematic fault that we had in our system over the years that actually needed to be addressed. And the thing about it is, this scam and this illicit activity of land abuse and misuse, especially to the quieting of Title Act, had even begun to modernize itself in terms of its strategies. I will show you in instances whereas there was justices themselves who actually classified it in terms of its corrupt activities as saying that the courts themselves were unwilling pawns in this land deal. That's because how the process was so done and how evidence was presented. The courts then find themselves unwittingly being a part of it. And I'm quoting the Court of Appeal Justice Stella Scott-Crean, who warned in her 2016 ruling that the Bahamian court system was susceptible to being unwilling pawns in the commission of land theft and fraud. That's because of how the game was playing and the faults and the deficiencies and the loopholes we would have had in laws. She also said that the Quiet Title Act in particular was effectively being employed as a tool to steal land, given that the material facts related to title applications were often hidden from the court. And you could find quotes and statements like this replete all over the place. And this has been causing real direct harm and pain to Bahamian people. And I'm glad we are, and we always should have, taken it equivalent to that of violence and rape. Because when somebody takes your home for you, and you took the time and you paid your mortgage, you had your celebration that you paid your last banknote, feeling that you're a fair and just man and you have heritage to pass on to your children. And then to find out that somebody comes and tell you what you have vested all your time and life work and the heritage that you had for your children was worth nothing. I thank God that I don't know of any reported incidences of people going postal. You could actually click out after that. I mean, could you imagine that? But this has been more commonplace than we thought. And then I remember the statements by one of our generational moguls in terms of land development, Franklin Wilson. And he's a younger, that's Frankie Wilson's son. So I think the perspective on this shows how a younger generation look, because I showed you how the abuse was done during the Acquiring Title Land Act. But this is what Franklin said. Franklin said they take it to a whole different level now. And this is why I was paying attention to the processes and the checks and balances on the register itself. See, it's one thing to develop the documents and trick it and spin it and everything else and so on and so forth, because I think one of the things that was mentioned, especially with the Linden Pillen States, and recently when there were lands developed in the Life-Akiti area out west, I think, is it Serenity or somewhere in that general area, about 1,000 acres. And I remember Carl Bethel also raising concerns about that, saying, how this land, as defective as it is, got registered in the first place. And then we saw with some of the statements that Franklin was actually saying, and one of the statements was, he's saying the increasing attempt to have deeds that were vested or transferred into real estate ownership in terms of record and the Registrar General and recording of the Registrar General. He said, they are now using the Registrar General Department through different ways to advance the same program. So they moved from the point of just tricking the courts. It seems that they even got to the point where they can manipulate people on the inside of the Registrar General and get this thing on the register. Get this thing in there. So they started multiplying the ways and that they could manipulate, and how we say in gaming, boxing it, their odds of abusing the privileges as it relate to land, and it was causing a very, very serious problem. And when you look at it, the exact same reasons that was outlined by the Attorney General for the necessity of bringing about this thing was actually not only expressed through Dr. Hubert Minnis, when he's Prime Minister, through his AG. The same thing was also expressed to Hubert Alexander Ingram in his efforts to bring about it. And all acknowledge that this is going to be a mammoth task, even to this current Attorney General. It's going to be tedious. It's going to feel invasive. But this is the surgery our country actually needs. Then we need to be very, very cautious, because we've seen in the system that not only has it gotten to the point that the way the laws is then written, even despite maybe the gut instinct of justices, that the court, like that's stated by another justice, was, how she said it? Unwilling pawns in the situation because of how the laws is actually written. But then we saw also manipulation for persons even who are actually registering it. Now when we reach to a point where there will be a once and for all registration of land to remove the ambiguities, then we need to be careful of those who are selected in this process, not even necessarily because of what may be done, but the very appearance because of what was done in the past. We need to make sure that the persons that we need to put in place, it is by necessity that we must have persons of tenure, a level of experience and expertise. But brother, honestly, in this country, some of the biggest thieves are some of the ones with the longest tenure and experiences, who've been playing this game a very long time. Some of the largest companies have been playing that same game a long time, ripping off land and destroying livelihood. Some of them would have been doing the exact same game as stated by our newest senator, whereas they played a dollar game. They throw up their title and they plainly tell you, so listen here, I could outspend you. I could run this all the way to Privy Council and my dollar's longer than yours, and many times it's not about justice, it's who got the longest pockets. That's a fact of the matter. So now when we start appointing these people, we must be beyond politics. We must even, in a sense, be beyond qualification, and we must look at ethics. We need to make sure that faces that are on those boards and in these places of responsibilities, when families look at that and see that name, they don't go into shock. They say, this is the same one who's stealing my land, and this is now the one over the land that is going to be locked in once and for all. Because we know our society, we know what our people have experienced, and we know historically what has been done before the 60s, going back into the 80s, all the way to now. The small man has been burnt many times by persons who carry names of honorableness. But they remember these names because they can remember who stole Grammy land. Now we poor and they rich. But the surgery still have to be done. So in every step of the way, we must do our best to be as transparent as we can. And as in the example that Senator Alcides gave in relation to the inland revenue matter and the statement that he made, it is many times best to have the statement out before you publish a thing. It is many times best to bring the people aboard with you and the understanding, and maybe even have a mechanism, because whereas persons could actually request that certain persons recuse themselves from a certain environment, though they may have been appointed and qualified. I believe that if there is legitimate cause that the public have, that they can establish, then the person should be able to be removed or recused from any particular decision-making process for either an individual or an environment. We don't seek to make it this thing more cumbersome or more of a mammoth task than it is, and this is a Herculean task. But the pain is real. The pain is real. So in support of this has been a long journey for our nation over a period of time. This, at best, in my opinion, can be on its way, if properly financed, by next year. It definitely can't be completed. Nobody's implying that it can, because it is a Herculean task. There are low-hanging fruits that we can get up and done. But with transparency, with proper funding, with access, with proper education, it is hoped that this can get things done. The greatest advantage to wealth for any generation is the stepping stone that the generation before them leave behind. And one of the greatest values, sustainable values, that anyone could have is that of land and the good name of their parents. And so with that, I want to admonish and present my support for the bill, and the hope that this bill would obtain its end. The hope that, if anything I say would have caused a need to consider, whether in policy or actually in legislative nature, addressing the issues again of accountability to the public, and also help and aid in the vetting and the history of persons who will be involved in this particular process, ensuring that the registration department and process itself is not also abused under this regime, as has been established as being abused, to this very day. And to ensure that best practices are obtained, so that the court, when they review this, as would have been done with other things, that they could see that, listen here, this is sufficiently tight, that when these steps are presented towards us, it makes it clear for a case that there is night and day, and there's apple and oranges, and a land can be adjudicated. My final point is this: that may address and begin the process of addressing illegalities and framework for improvement of land registration in the country. But I want to end with this point. Where are we with making whole those individuals who now still, and I've raised this before, have outstanding issues, debts, court rulings, payments from lands that would have been taken by eminent domain or otherwise for airports and for roads? Where are we now with them? I understand budget shortfalls, but for God's sake, the government itself, no government, should be the ones who is actually hypocritically causing people to lose out on what's entitled to them, when they have penalties for the same individual if they don't pay their taxes towards the government. How much, maybe the AG could help, that we expect to pay out to resolve those outstanding judicial matters that should be pending, and particularly as relates to land and the usage of land, and or as a whole as relates to matters that has been adjudicated against the government that they are now obligated by law to settle. And with that, I rest and say, let us all cooperate in bringing about this necessary change in our land reform. One thing, though, we have always had a struggle, and I've raised this before. with the manpower that we need. Because we look at it structurally, all the legal framework, which I think a lot of work has gone into, and I can see where work was done before and how it's tightening up. Excellent. I can see the skill set, because we have a lot of competent attorneys in our country. Again, let's find the ones who have been practicing thieving, all right. But we have historically had an underdeveloped lands and survey department. And for all the work that needs to be done, that institution itself needs to be strengthened. Beforehand, I've mentioned before, we've had that shortages of surveyors, which is also going to be critical to doing what we need to do. I think we have a good amount of appraisers because most of our real estate persons are qualified to do that, and doing those assessments, that's not a problem. What are we doing now to engage the necessary amount of persons who can help with the surveying of these properties? And then also, what are we doing futuristically, maybe through BTVI or other places, to train or through our scholarship grants to encourage our young people to take up scholarship and take up the task of becoming skilled surveyors, et cetera, to fill the gap that we have in our system. Because without which, that too is going to add delay to this overall project. And with that, I rest.